After the first occurrence of the character A, we need to print not just the index but a comma as well. So we get displays such as 7, 12, 15. This is not straightforward because we cannot always print a comma after the index or print a comma before the index. For example, if we always printed a comma after printing an index, we will get displays like this: 7, 12, 15, and if 15 is the last position at which the character A occurs, we have a problem because we have a comma coming after the 15. We cannot print a comma before the 7 either, before the first match, which would look a bit odd. So we don't want displays of this kind either. So we need to have a little bit of tricky code here to print a comma only after the first index. So the code for the second and all succeeding matches would include the printing of a comma. So what we need to do is to read a character and then increment the position of the input, that is the index. Index shows where we are in the input. So increment index. If the character is equal to the letter A, we need to increment counter and print. Let's say for the moment we put a comma and the index, but that needs to be reworked. This is not quite right, printing the comma and the index. So the code here has to be conditional. So we will need to see whether we are having a second or later match of the letter A. So what we need to do is, if we have the very first match, counter would be 1. So if counter is 1, we know that this is the very first match, so we print just the index. On the other hand, if counter is 2 or more, we know that we have a second or later match, so we can print the comma as well. So that will take care of this problem. So this is the code for processing a single character. But before we get into this code, we need to initialize index and counter to 0. We need to identify the block of code that would get repeated. This is essentially the code that should be repeated, but we need to repeat this only if we can read a character, if there is one more character to be read. So let's attempt to read a character, and if the attempt fails, we need to print a message, print an appropriate message, and stop. That appropriate message would be either the counter or a message saying there is no occurrence of the letter A in the input. Otherwise, we get into this piece of code where we increment the index and process the character A. Otherwise, we get into this piece of code where we increment index and process the input character. As in the case of the previous examples and case studies, we need to have this test at the top of the repeating block. That is, you should check whether we can read another character, and if it is not possible, we must exit the loop. This must be at the top of the loop. So we should attempt to read a character at the end of this block. So this would be the repeating block.